There is a moment in 1984 that I keep coming back to. Winston buys a diary, a physical diary. He finds a corner of his apartment where the telescreen cannot quite see him, and he begins to write. That is his rebellion. That is how it starts. And the first time I read that, I thought that is extraordinarily brave. The second time I read it, I thought something different. I thought he's the only person in Oceania with a corner the telescreen cannot reach. Most people do not get that corner. That is what this episode is about. Not whether Winston is brave. He is. But what kind of bravery the novel imagines, and what kind it cannot see. What would you do if writing it down could get you killed? Let us be fair to Winston first, because he deserves that. Winston Smith is not stupid. He knows exactly what he's doing when he picks up that pen. He knows what happens to people who think the wrong thoughts, let alone write them down. The thought police are real. The consequences are total. Room 101 is not a rumor. And yet he writes. He writes down with Big Brother over and over in large capital letters. He knows that doing this probably means he's already dead. He calls it a crime that contained all other crime. That takes something. Call it courage. Call it need. Call it the particular desperation of a man whose inner life is the last thing no one has yet taken from him. His resistance is entirely interior. It lives in his mind, then briefly on paper, then in his relationship with Julia. It is private, romantic, individual. The act of a man trying to remain a self in a world designed to dissolve self. That is a real and recognizable human impulse. It is not nothing. But here is what I want us to look at carefully. What does that kind of resistance require? What condition does Winston need just to get started? What Winston actually needs to survive, even briefly? Winston needs several things that he almost takes for granted, and that the novel almost takes for granted with him. He needs literacy, the ability to write, to compose, to construct an argument on paper. That is not universal. Under many real authoritarian systems, literacy itself has been weaponized, controlled, rationed, and denied. He needs privacy, even partial privacy. That corner of the room, that small blind spot. Most people living under surveillance states, then and now, have had no such corner. He needs the concept of individual interiority as resistance. The idea that self is a fortress, that preserving your private thought is an act of defiance. That is a very particular philosophical tradition. It is not the only one. And critically, he is alone. His resistance is solitary, almost by design. Julia is there, yes, but they are hiding from everyone else. The pros surround them in their millions, and Winston barely sees them as agents of anything. Now, hold all of that, and let me show you what resistance looked like when this condition did not exist. I have been sitting with this question for a while, because it is not a comfortable one. It asks us to look at who the novel was written for. In 1929, southeastern Nigeria, a rumor spreads that the British colonial government is planning to tax women directly, their property, their market goods, their livelihood. What happened next is not one person writing in a diary. What happened is that tens of thousands of women across hundreds of miles, speaking different languages, from different communities, organize. They sing, they dance, they wear ferns and painted faces. They surround the home of colonial warrant chiefs and demand they resign. They refuse to disperse. The British call it the Aba Women's Riot. The women called it Ogu Nwanyị, the Women's War. There was no single leader, no written manifesto, no diary, no individual hero whose interior life we follow. The resistance was collective, loud, embodied, and deeply communal. And it worked. The taxation plan was abandoned. Winston Smith would not have known what to do with that. The novel would not have known what to do with it either. Go further. Think about what happens to memory and knowledge under authoritarian rule when writing is dangerous, when your books cannot be taken, when your language cannot be banned. Communities across the colonized world develop an answer that predates Orwell by centuries. They put it in song and proverbs, and the way a story is told at night to children who will tell it to their children. The subversive content is encoded in the form. Authority cannot easily confiscate a song that everyone already knows. That is not passivity. That is a technology of resistance so sophisticated it survived for generations. Winston's diary lasted what? Weeks? James C. Scott spent years studying Malaysian peasants under economic oppression. What he found and documented carefully in Weapons of the Weak is that most resistance by most people throughout history has looked nothing like open confrontation. It looked like walking slowly, pretending not to understand another, quietly sabotaging a quota you are forced to meet, maintaining, in small invisible ways, a refusal that power can never quite locate or punish. Scott called it everyday resistance. It is not heroic in the way novels like heroes. It does not have a face you can put on a cover, but it is extraordinarily durable, and it is the form of resistance that most human beings have actually practiced in most places across most of history. Winston Smith would have been caught in the first week because he was trying to be legible. He wanted his resistance to mean something, to exist somewhere, to be recorded. That impulse, the need for the gesture to be witnessed, is deeply human, but it is also what makes him findable. The question 1984 never asks. Here's the thing that I want to sit with you on for a moment. The pros make up 85% of Oceania's population. Winston looks at them, he watches them, he thinks about them, and what he concludes is that if there is hope, it lies in the pros. Orwell gives him that line. It might be the most famous line in the book outside of the last page. And then the novel does almost nothing with it. The pros sing, they buy lottery tickets, they gossip, they mourn their dead in their own way, and Winston watches all of this and sees nothing useful. Inertia, passivity, a sleeping giant that will not wake. But what if Winston cannot read what he is seeing? What if the pros' endurance, their communal life, their song, and their grave, what if that is not the absence of resistance, but a different language of it? One that Winston, trained as he is in the vocabulary of individual heroism, simply does not have the eyes for. The novel never asks that question. It cannot, quite from where it stands. That is not a flaw that destroys the book. 1984 is still one of the most important novels of the 20th century. But knowing what it cannot see makes you a better reader of it, and it makes you ask, whose story of resistance are we still not telling? The resistance that history remembers is almost always the resistance that left a document behind. But most of the resistance that actually kept people alive, kept cultures alive, left no document at all. And 1984, for all its brilliance, is a novel about the document. On to end, not with a verdict, but with a question I think is worth carrying with you. When you finish 1984, if you have finished it, who did you grieve for? I would guess you grieved for Winston. Maybe for Julia. Probably not for the pros. What did the novel do to make the endurance feel like less than its collapse? That is worth thinking about, seriously. Because the answer says something, not just about Orwell, but about which stories we have been taught to see as heroic, and which ones we have been taught to look straight through. Next episode, we go inside the most chilling invention in the whole book, newspeak. And I want to show you that it is not invented by Orwell. It was field tested long before he puts a name to it.